There are so many questions regarding women's health, particularly menopause. So we have a returning guest, OBGYN Dr. Ardelle Piper, who has generously offered more time to provide some answers to your questions. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Kaminski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey.
We are excited about today's Q&A with Dr. Ardelle Piper, and we got tons of questions from listeners. We want to know all about the menopause, the perimenopause, the postmenopause. And Shawna, what about with you? What question or questions do you stand out to you, or where do you want to start? Because this is a list.
Well, first of all, welcome, Ardelle. We're so thrilled that you're here and you're giving us some of your valuable time. And I think it's important that we just talk about menopause hormone therapy in general for starters, and that's going to address a lot of the questions that came in. So if you could just kind of help us with the benefits of menopause hormone therapy.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the second time. Our first conversation was great. So many things are common questions for people. And so I think we covered a lot of really good basic stuff in our first interview, but there are themes that come up all the time over and over again. And this is why it's so great to have a platform like this where one answer can be heard by hundreds of people, because there are such common questions about menopause and a lot of misinformation out there and a lot of people just kind of filling in the gaps. There are some things that we know for sure. There are some things that are being researched, and then there are really good educated guesses that can sound like it's been proven when really there's just a lot that we still need to figure out. Benefits of hormone therapy, to your first question, or to the first question that people are always asking about, are pretty clear, right? If you have symptoms going through the menopause transition, one of the main benefits of trialing menopausal hormone therapy is to treat those symptoms. Right. And this has been the big problem for people over the last 10, 20 years since the WHI was published in 2002. And a lot of people were just not even offered a discussion about them. The patients themselves, women themselves thought, well, I don't want to go anywhere near hormones. It's going to give me cancer. So they didn't even say that they were having problems or symptoms. And doctors, if they didn't feel they had a really good solution, then they were like, well, why ask them if they have symptoms if there's nothing I can do to help them? And so it's kind of been a double-edged sword when it comes to the problem of people not talking about their symptoms. If you have the classic, and we call them vasomotor symptoms. Vasomotor symptoms kind of is this entire category of temperature regulation problems. So people will call them hot flashes or hot flushes. It just depends on where you live. If they happen at night, they tend to be called night sweats because it's the same thing. Your body, misreads temperature cues. You're not actually fevered. You don't actually need to blow off heat. So if it's at bedtime, if it's at night and you're sleeping, and your body burns off a whole bunch of heat as sweat, well, then all of a sudden you wake up out of your sleep feeling cold and shivering, because that's what happens when you sweat. It's your body's cooling mechanism, but you never needed to be cooled off in the first place. So those can really impact on people's ability to function, to work, fatigue, then all of your other lifestyle things, your relationships. And so if you have vasomotor symptoms, temperature dysregulation symptoms, that is a huge benefit of systemic hormone therapy. If you're at high risk of getting osteoporosis, it's very clear that there can be a benefit of adding in hormone therapy to a lot of other things that should be addressed with you. And they specifically say in the guidelines high risk because we don't know, actually. If people are very low risk, they don't have a family history, they aren't either very underweight or very overweight, they don't have autoimmune or chronic disease that have reduced their bone mass over time, if they're eating well with lots of protein, if they're weight bearing, exercising, if they've got calcium and vitamin D, and they've got muscle mass, and they're not taking medications that are reducing their bone mass. If you are a low risk person, we don't know. We don't have any evidence to say that adding hormone therapy when you're a very low risk person will make any difference, right? So that's one of those controversies that out there about systemic estrogen therapy. Vaginal and bladder and vulva symptoms, that's very clearly a benefit of hormone therapy. If you use systemic hormone therapy because you have the hot flushes, night sweats, etc., etc., 50% of the time, the dose that gets rid of your hot flushes and night sweats will also treat your vagina, vulva, bladder, and it's that constellation, we call it genitourinary syndrome of menopause. But you don't have to be on systemic therapy to treat that. I think we covered this, last time. You can use local or, topical creams, tablets, things that you place in your vagina. Those things are an indication and a benefit of using either the local hormones or of the systemic hormones. And then now, as we're actually listening more to people and doing more research, right? Doing more research and getting more results, we are now finally starting to see that, yes, there are people who have mood problems that can be benefited by hormone therapy. And this can either be people who have had hormone related mood problems whenever they've gone through a big flux. So people who've had, PMS as that's a hormone fluctuation mood issue. People who've had postpartum depression, people who've never had a problem with mood before, and then all of a sudden now in menopause they do. Or truth is, people who've had longstanding mood problems, and then the instability of their symptoms and sleep deprivation and stuff kicks off their mood and makes it worse, right? Again, you can make an argument of like chicken and egg, what comes first? If you're not sleeping and you don't feel well in your body and your skin and you're hot flushing all the time, how much is that affecting your mood, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these things kind of like, mix all around together, but those are, some of the most clear benefits. We are getting more evidence, and it's been coming out, even in the last number of weeks, about finally quantifying how many women have pain, musculoskeletal pain, joint pain, that again has come out of the blue. Can it be arthritis? Yes. But can it be something that is very specific to your menopause? Yes. Can it be secondary to not sleeping well, not moving well, not eating well? Yes. So it ends up being one of these things that you got to have in that conversation of all of those different symptoms that you're having as part of your menopause to see what are the benefits I'm looking for, what are proven through the literature, and what things are not 100% certain, but my risk is low, and so it's worth an experiment to try. And that has to be a very well discussed, conversation. That's what we call shared decision making, and that's part of deciding who should go on hormone therapy for the benefit.
Yeah, I think the big message is that it's not for everyone. It's very much an individual discussion with a woman and their practitioner as to whether that is the right thing for them for the symptoms that they are experiencing. And generally, when would you suggest starting? Because, I talk to so many women that are saying, well, I think I'm just going through starting menopause, and they're in their 50s. And they are probably have been years in perimenopause, but their perception of menopause is such that it's like, okay, well, my period stops, but that's not it. And so when should women be looking to have that conversation with their doctor about hormone therapy?
Yeah. I think this also points back to the question, to the fact that we have, as in the medical field, we've appreciated that women start having menstrual irregularities, heavier periods, worse periods, etc., in their 40s, and we've just kind of called it abnormal uterine bleeding and such, and we've treated it with progestin IUDs or endometrial ablations, or of course in the past hysterectomies. I don't know. I think everyone in my grandmother's generation had a hysterectomy, right? Because when they had their horrible perimenopause, their uterus was just removed, sometimes with their ovaries as well. And then they were just given preference and they didn't even question it, right? So yes, a lot of times people's issues in their perimenopause are starting before they've even, started dropping periods. Now, the trick is though, in that scenario, it's not 100% positive that starting hormone therapy at that point will be what makes a difference. And there are people out there that it does make a difference. I would guess that probably the people where it does make a difference is because they're spending more of their time in very low estrogen rather than in high estrogen. But if and that's because your ovaries are like fritzing out, they're fluctuating, they're trying to squeeze out every last follicle they have. So it's highly variable from month to month how much estrogen you make, whether or not you ovulate. And so when people's hormone levels are actually off and running quite high, I have had, and I'm sure every doctor out there has had, many clients that they are quite convinced that this is a hormonal problem. They're right. But then they're quite convinced that what they need is their hormones to be balanced and they need to try hormone therapy. And in a lot of people, you can put them on hormone therapy and they do not feel better. They will actually say that they feel worse. They will
Yeah.
say, my mood got worse, my breast tenderness got worse. And it's because you've raised their baseline, right? And there have been cases of this in other countries where it actually has become a problem. People have been told, well, just take more. And that's not the answer, right? And so in perimenopause, when your hormone levels are very high and very low, sometimes it is actually a better choice to try something that is a non-hormonal option to help with your mood, with your hot flushes, etc. And that is where the low dose antidepressants can be really helpful. And again, they've been promoted to women in a way that makes women feel gaslit, and they haven't been explained in a way that makes them understand that, no, really, we understand this is your perimenopause and your hormone fluctuations. But if we try the hormone therapy and it doesn't work, these might work actually quite well. And I have seen a lot of clients who in their perimenopause do much better if they have, say, an endometrial ablation or a progestin IUD to reduce the bleeding, and then they try a low dose antidepressant. And then, yes, they also get a coach so that they can get exercising and address their, binge eating and reduce their alcohol intake. And it ends up being a really multifactorial approach often in perimenopause.
Wow, that is very interesting.
I think about this with what we deal with, Shawna, when we have a client that comes to us and says, well, what diet do I need to do? Or how do I look? What is the one thing that I need to do to lose this weight? And it's such a multi-level approach. We have to look at their whole picture and look at
Yeah.
what are they doing sleep-wise? What are they doing movement-wise?
Yeah.
What are they doing eating-wise? What are they doing
Yeah.
drinking? And so what I hear you saying, Dr. Piper, is that it's not just it's not always a simple answer, and it's very
No.
specific to the individual and what's going on with you as to how we address it, right?
Yeah. And the kicker is that it changes with time,
Mhm.
because early in your perimenopause, you are usually not in low estrogen, environment much at all, right? You are still having a very monthly period. It might be just a little bit heavier than it was before, but that is the earliest stage of your perimenopause, and people can start to feel the mood and the sleep disruption then. But then it can potentially, for some people, get worse. And then, your solution might be a little bit different. And then you actually start dropping periods. Well, now you're having more months where you're not making estrogen. So now it might make a bit more sense to try layering in some therapy. But then that hormone therapy might be actually a low dose birth control pill. If a big part of your problem is when you do ovulate, it's horrible, right? When you do ovulate, it's horrible heavy periods and horrible PMS. Then hormone therapy, menopausal hormone therapy, won't stop those last ovulations of perimenopause. If you do try menopausal hormone therapy, then it's often something we call cyclic, where yes, you can have your estrogen every day, but your progesterone comes off and on, trying to mimic that ovulation that you're not making regularly. And then once you get through all of that and you have, not been having bleeding and it's clear that your ovaries are done, now you're into, what might be more consistent menopause hormone therapy. And that's where your dose is the same every single day. So throughout the transition, your answers to what's going to help you feel better are going to change. And that is also a big frustration for women. And it can be a big frustration for doctors, because what doctors haven't been, and again, I often use the term doctors, but I mean healthcare providers, whether you have a nurse care practitioner or a physician assistant or whoever it is, right? When doctors have not been really well trained about how this physiologic phase changes with time and how our different tools, can be used, then they're frustrated because they don't know how to help people, right? So, but it is changing, right? We were having this conversation, right? This is evidence that it is getting better.
Yeah, and I the big thing is, it would be fantastic if a woman had a doctor that she could stick with, or a medical history where she was able to check in with her medical practitioner. I'm feeling this now. This is how I'm feeling now. And the hope for the future is that is going to become more of the norm. And we are kind of like at the forefront of pushing that sort of healthcare going forward, and that education.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we've talked about the beginning of menopause therapy.
Mhm.
How about how long can you be on it, and when is it too late to ever start?
Yeah, these are two very common questions. The question of, I'm 60 now. I've been told I have to come off. I get a referral to have that discussion all the time. Or someone who comes and they are 60 and they didn't start when they were 50, and they'll say, "Well, can I start now?" Right? Those are actually two very different scenarios, even though the age itself might be the very same. Right? And a good way to explain this is that when women have gone through, say, surgical menopause or premature ovarian insufficiency, people who started on their hormone therapy in their 30s or their 40s, they've been subject to the myths and disinformation where they'll have, unfortunately, a doctor who will say to them, "Oh, it's been 5 years. We have evidence to say that the 5-year mark, your breast cancer risk starts to go up. And so you got to come off your hormone therapy." Well, if that woman was 30 and now she's 35 and she's being told she needs to come off because now all of a sudden her hormone therapy is carcinogenic, wrong. That is wrong. Right. But again, those people have obviously, not learned otherwise. The truth is that if you have gone through menopause very early, there are very clear guidelines and very clear science that is very strongly supportive of people in that younger age group being offered menopausal hormone therapy until at least the average age of menopause without hassling them, right? With supporting that this is what we truly call hormone replacement, because you should be at least keeping up with your peers. And of course, this is provided they don't have a contraindication. Like the reason why they're going through this is because, they had an estrogen receptor positive cancer, right? Granted. So when you have been on hormone therapy, either early like that, or if you've been started, in your late 40s, your early 50s because of symptoms, and any of those situations, now you creep up to 60. There's no rule anywhere in any guideline that says at a certain number of years or at a certain age, you have to then just now arbitrarily stop. And the Menopause Society from the States has a guideline specifically about this, saying, look, there are many people who will hot flush forever or for many years. And if you try to bring them off their hormone therapy, those symptoms come back. And so then let's not fearmonger those women and say, well, you can't stay on it because now you're breasts. Instead, we need to say, well, you obviously still need this. So again, let's have a more fulsome discussion about other things you can do to reduce your breast cancer risk, because obviously you need to stay on this, right? This is different than someone who has actually, say, gone through menopause at 50. And now there's two different scenarios, even to break this one down further. Someone who's gone through menopause at 50 and had maybe some symptoms. I've had some people who've wondered if they have ever gone through menopause because they think menopause equals hot flushes and they never had them. So they actually have come to me 10 years with no period and said, I don't think I had menopause. Yeah, you did. Right. Right. So there are people who've gone through their menopause, didn't have a whole lot of hot flushes or mood problems or night sweats. And then now they're coming at 60 because they're hearing all of this chatter on Instagram and social media. And they're like, I want to go on hormone therapy because it's going to stop me from getting dementia, or because I want to protect my bones or whatever else. And again, now this is now a scenario where we don't have the same amount of research. When you have been postmenopausal for 10 years, again, do a risk assessment, figure out where your advantages and risks lie. If you don't have indications, if you don't have symptoms, then, but do you actually have low bone mass? Have you done everything else? Are you already on a bisphosphonate? Maybe that is your indication to be thinking about menopausal hormone therapy starting late. But if you don't have symptoms, then the social chatter out there shouldn't make you feel like that you're missing the boat and you're not taking care of your own health if now you don't go on it late, when you don't have a true, science proven indication, right? That's one scenario. The other scenario is people who did go through menopause at 50 and now they're 60, 65 or so, and they actually truly have been hot flushing this whole time. Yeah. They actually truly have been miserable and had systemic symptoms that have never been treated. And so again, the guidelines would say, what's the risk assessment? Do these people have high blood pressure, things that are putting them at risk of clot? Are they, taking care of their lifestyle? Where is their risk benefit analysis of saying, can we start menopause hormone therapy because these hot flushes have been untreated and are truly impacting your quality of life? Should we try the non-hormonals first? If you try to give menopausal hormone therapy to someone whose body has not seen those ovarian hormones in 10, sometimes 15, I've had people come to me 20 years later wanting to know if they can start. The truth is that we don't know what the status of their vessels is. We don't know what the status of their estrogen receptors are. We don't know if they're actually going to be hyperreactive. I've had people who are so incredibly sensitive to menopausal hormone therapy if they try starting it late, because because their receptors have changed, right?
Yeah.
So it ends up being then, those cases are, legitimately, those are ones that should come to a menopause specialist to have a discussion about saying, like, let's talk about this whole big, thing
Yeah.
about, all of your risks and benefits. But people who are 20 years into their menopause and feel well and were never on hormone therapy shouldn't feel that they're now, having to give into social pressure, that they haven't done something good for their health if they don't go, force their way onto hormone therapy now. We just don't
Yeah.
know those answers.
Yeah, because there is a whole, actually, like, because I'm 60, kind of, 10 years ago, 15, menopause, it was like hush hush. It was Voldemort. You just didn't speak
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so a lot of people suffered in silence. And so
Absolutely.
that is a discussion for them to have with their practitioner, because
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't need to be suffering, but then you don't
No.
necessarily need to be on it because it's the thing.
Yeah. And the tricky one with this is that now that was a discussion about systemic hormone therapy. And that is, by definition, hormone therapy that's going through your whole entire body system. So a tablet that you swallow, a gel that you apply to your skin, or a sticker patch. The goal of systemic hormone therapy is to give you measurable blood serum levels, because that's how we know it's making it through your circulation to all your body systems, right? That is different than, local or topical, therapy that you specifically are placing on the vagina, the vulva, the bladder tissues in order to fix those problems. And the goal is that you cannot measure those medications in the bloodstream. The goal is that those are making contact with the skin surface and changing them. And we do know that when there have been people who have either not been given local therapies or have stopped their local therapies, if you get enough, many years of not having hormones around and maybe tissue damage, we can't necessarily guarantee that we can reverse, very bad tissue damage that has accumulated over the last 20 years, right? We do have guidance to say that women, if they have GSM that has not been treated, it should be treated. Moisturizers, lubricants, yes, try the local therapies, but you might have to try them at very low doses, or it might be a little bit tricky to get someone onto a local therapy. They might actually get initially a flush of feeling that it gets into their system, because their tissues of their vagina and their vulva are like paper mache. The tissues can't even hold the local therapy locally, right? And so it can be a little bit tricky to get people like that on. But once you can get them on, then those systemic symptoms come down. And again, it's not getting into their bloodstream. And then they can stay on that long term again for the rest of their life, right?
And
so if we see that's happening with local, that if the tissues aren't treated and they're, with estrogen for 10, 20 years, then of course we should think that in other body tissues and systems, if your body hasn't seen hormones in 10, 20 years, we just don't know what the response is going to be by then, flooding those tissues again with hormones.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, if you can just tell us what GSM means, just because our listeners may not know what.
Genital urinary syndrome of menopause. So in the past, that was referred to as vaginal atrophy, right? Very simplistic. And again, women started saying, I don't like you discussing my vagina as being atrophic, right? It might be technically an accurate word, right? When something, grows less, it's, when something grows more, it's hypertrophy. When something doesn't grow, it's atrophy. So it, from the definition of the word, it's accurate, but it doesn't ring really well with women, right? And so they changed that term now to be genital urinary syndrome of menopause. And they specifically named it that way because, again, a lot of people kind of simplified it into being like, well, no, I don't have dryness with sex. This has nothing to do with whether or not you have sex. If you have sex, it's going to show a symptom of it. But it is about your bladder, about your vulva, about your vagina. If you don't have intimacy with another partner, you can still have the problem and you can still deserve treatment, because it is your body, it is your vagina, vulva, bladder. It's your bladder urgency and your itch and scratch and feeling like you're on the edge of infection. These things are problems with GSM, genital urinary syndrome menopause, whether or not you are currently or in the future will be sexually active.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about who would not be a candidate for menopause therapy?
Yeah.
Therapy.
And the guidelines, all the guidelines will have this written in very clear paragraphs, right? The classic ones have been, and I even copied and pasted them over so I could even just read them out, right? Contraindications are if you've had an estrogen receptor positive cancer, right? So the classic one there is breast. right? And again, a lot of people have then interpreted that to be like, oh, estrogen gave me cancer. No, it's that your breasts, by definition, by development, because you are a female, have estrogen receptors. Healthy cells will have estrogen receptors on them. Okay. And so it's actually a marker of your cancer not being as wonky and weird if they've retained those estrogen receptors. And so then we can use them as a tool to target them and block them and make sure then that those cells are not being given a signal to grow through the estrogen receptors. Okay. And so if you have had an estrogen receptor positive cancer, Dr. Liz O'Royden from the UK does a really good job of explaining this, saying that there can be, cells that will lie dormant. And breast cancer is one of those that, yes, a lot of people don't die from their breast cancer anymore. Thank goodness, right? But if people have a recurrence, it can happen way later down the road. And so then it ends up being a real risk benefit analysis of saying, well, what are my symptoms? Like how much am I willing to risk? Most doctors are not comfortable feeling that they are going to increase your risk of having a recurrence by giving you menopausal hormone therapy that might then find those cells wherever they are and cause them to grow again when we want them to stay not growing, or even, be so blocked in their growth that they truly die off, right? That's the best case scenario. So that's why if you've had an estrogen or progesterone receptor positive breast cancer, the classic advice has been to try the other types of hormone therapies and such, or the other types of menopausal therapies, the non-hormonals instead first. If you've actually had a high, risk clot again. So this isn't a provoked clot where you had surgery, you were laid up, unable to move for, weeks, and then you end up getting a clot. Well, that clot was obviously secondary to your surgery, the vascular damage or immobility. And so that's not the same thing as, say, someone who carries 2 copies of a broken gene, that would increase your clot significantly, from a genetic perspective, right? If you've actually had a clot, again, this is a scenario where now you've proven that you do have an ability to make a clot. It's almost like once you've had a heart attack, now your body has shown and declared that there's something different about it than before. So again, that's the difference between primary prevention and secondary prevention when we're trying to treat those people. Once you've had a heart attack or a clot, that elevates your risk of then having it happen again. And so that's the scenario in which, again, many doctors are less comfortable prescribing menopause hormone therapy. Now, if in some of those scenarios, if you're in that lower risk of there's extremely high risk, there's medium risk, there's low risk when it comes to these heart and clot problems, right? If you are still in the low risk category, but you're, more than zero, general population, then again, we can try to get around it by first saying, let's try non-hormonals. But then, you could always still be using the locals for your GSM. And then if you need to be trialing systemic hormone therapy, it would be logical that, of course, the guidance says try with the lowest possible dose. Try with a transdermal estrogen rather than an oral one, because then absorbing through your skin, it makes it to your body systems before it makes it to your liver, where there can be an activation of your platelet and clotting pathways. So there are ways that we can, again, sort of just do a bit of a risk assessment and say, if you are truly high risk, we shouldn't be doing something that is going to increase your risk of creating a clot in your vessels. But if you are above general baseline risk, but you're still kind of in a low category, is there some way that we can work around this? So that's been on the list. Active liver disease. So if you have active problems with your liver, or you have a new problem with blood pressure that hasn't yet been controlled, we should get those things sorted out before we start you on hormone therapy. If you have abnormal bleeding from your uterus, or, an abnormality or a lump on your breast that hasn't been sorted out yet, again, makes sense if we sort those things out and get a diagnosis before starting you on hormone therapy. Because if you have, early stages of uterine cancer, and that's why you're bleeding so heavily and irregularly, or you have, a breast, cancer that is in the process of being diagnosed, well, then of course not. We shouldn't give fuel to those problems, right? So those are the things that tend to be, the top of the list of reasons why you should not consider menopausal hormone therapy.
Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Kerr Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Kaminski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback. If you're enjoying the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, please subscribe and share it with other health-minded women. Ratings and reviews are also much appreciated and help us get our message out to a larger audience.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.